Hello and welcome to another Doctor's Assistant 1 video, and today I'm doing another classic Doctor Who review on the channel. I'll be honest, a little bit strange for me to be saying that, because I'm pretty sure the last classic Doctor Who episode I did or review I did was of Day of the Daleks, and that was back in sort of October, November time last year, 2019. So this is actually the first, hopefully not the only, but the first at least, Doctor Who, or classic Doctor Who review I've done on the channel for 2020. So yeah, also another little bit of trivia and or housekeeping or whatever you want to call it, is that it's one of only 3 William Hartnell and or sort of 60s Doctor Who, well not only, I've also reviewed, I think, the War Games as well. So this is the 4th sort of 1960s black and white Doctor Who episode I've ever reviewed on the channel, so sorry if I'm not very sort of familiar with that era of the show, or have any sort of, not so much wrong opinions, but wrong, say anything wrong in terms of like facts and statistics, or anything that I might say in terms of like, you know, stuff in relation to this story maybe. One thing I will say is that it's one of the few classic 60s Doctor Who stories that we've got complete, meaning all 4 parts of this story and or episodes of this story are here, meaning all of them are live action, like, you know, actual film reels and that. You know, you don't have to watch it on telesnaps or wait for an animation like we have done with the likes of the recent 2 Patrick Troughton stories, being Terror the Macra, or Macra Terror even, and the Faceless Ones. And also, as you can see here, you've got my very nice little 5-inch William Hartnell action figure here, just accompanying the DVD for a bit of a aesthetic change other than just having the DVD. Talking about the DVD, the cover kind of gives away the War Machine's aesthetic and look, which is a bit annoying. You've also got the BT Tower, which is very prominent to the story. You've got Hartnell there, you've got Doctor Who, the War Machines, BBC DVD, the William Hartnell years, 1963 to 66, so, you know. So he did 3 years, and then PG, and then on the spine you've got similar sort of stuff. You've got To Entertain, BBC, The War Machines, William Hartnell in a Bubble, Doctor Who, and then you've got on the back, starring William Hartnell, you've got the row of all the screenshots for the episode, you've got the synopsis and the special features, and when this was originally broadcast at the runtime, and all the other lovely gobbledygook at the bottom there. You've got the DVD here, and you've also got the lovely writer's notes as well, which tell you a little bit of behind the scenes for the story and that. So yeah, I just watched this episode today, first time watching this. I think I got this around this time last year, back in 2019, but I've only just got around to watching it today of this recording, and yeah, it's pretty decent. I mean, of the 3 William Hartnell stories that I have seen so far, it's maybe one of the weaker stories, but honestly, it's not terrible. It's just a bit difficult really for me to really sort of put my head and or person in the sort of mind space of someone back then, because you've got to take into consideration that this, if I'm not mistaken, was the last episode of the 3rd series of Doctor Who. So up until this point, Doctor Who had only been going on for 2 years, and then it kind of got into its 3rd year, or end of its 3rd year, or whatever, you know. It's sort of, this is also near the end of the Hartnell era, and yeah, you've only got the Smugglers and the 10th Planet after this. It's very contemporary, honestly. It kind of reminds me of like a 60s version of, say, something like Bells of St. John, or Bells of St. John, should I say. It kind of feels more like a sort of more sort of 2013 sort of era, and or 2012, 2013 sort of, you know, 2012 sort of version of like this story, the War Machines, and that. The BT Tower is awesome. I love that as like an idea, like this central hub and or thing that's in the centre of London, that's so new and different, and no pun intended, but alien, you know. The design of the War Machines looks awesome. I do like the War Machine like design. to the point where I'd love an action figure. Like, seriously, character options, please get on that. Like, if you could find a way to make a brand new sort of action figure and or like War Machine, like machine as an action figure, as like a 5-inch action figure that, or maybe a bit taller, maybe like a 6-inch action figure that I could have tower over Hartnell, that would be awesome, you know. I'm pretty sure this Hartnell obviously isn't based off this story, and that because Hartnell wears a different costume, his costume being like that of like a cape and the hat, which is he's quite renowned for wearing that hat sometimes. And that it's the first story with Ben and Polly. Ben and Polly get introduced in this story, and what did I think of them? I thought they were very cool. I honestly really like Ben and Polly. I think I like Polly slightly more than Ben, but to be fair, this is literally the first ever time I've ever experienced either of these two characters, and honestly, neither of them were that bad. I think I like Polly a little bit more, maybe just because she's a bit more sort of, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot more of like the world against her, being a 1960s woman, or a woman in 1960s even, sort of London and or England. So I feel like her being the character that she is, it's a little bit more important than that of Ben, in so much as Ben's just, you know, a bloke in the 1960s, so much like a bloke now, everything's fine with him, whereas I feel like, as I say, like a lot more stacked against Polly, and she's kind of more, for lack of a better term, the brains of the operation, whereas Ben's a lot more of the sort of gung-ho sort of action hero, which I quite like about Ben, but when it comes to smarts, that's not his strong suit, but where he falls short in terms of his brains, Polly picks up that sort of aspect, and then vice versa. You know, she won't be able to fight against a lot of the other characters in the story, but that's where Ben shines. And then as for the Doctor is just this sort of grandfatherly, like, wizard sort of character, you know, this sort of quite mysterious kind of character. A lot of the time the Doctor's in scenes, but he's just sort of working things out. He's quite methodical, he's got a very inquisitive mind, definitely, and it always feels like he's quite a few steps ahead than everyone else in a scene, and he even feels like he's always more important than anyone else. Like, you know, there'll be quite a few characters in a scene, and then they'll introduce the Doctor, and they'll be like, "Oh, so you're the Doctor? Yes. So and so told me about you," and that, as though, like, you know, he's got this air of like mystery to him, but also air of like importance. Like if someone's, like 7 or 8%, or like or 7 or 8 out of 10 level of importance, then the Doctor's 9 or 10. He is always the most important. And rightly so, he is the main character, or the main sort of show should really revolve around him, or at least I think so. Or at least in the early days it definitely should have. Dodo Chaplin is also in this one. I did know going into this that it would be her last story, and I also knew that it was Ben and Polly's introduction story. Dodo Chaplin is, what can I say, kind of pointless in this story. She doesn't do much. She's just sort of there in part 1 and then kind of disappears in part 2, and then part 3 she's not even mentioned at all, I'm pretty sure. And then she's not really mentioned at all in part 4, either, until right at the end when the Doctor's leaving. Then Ben and Polly kind of see the Doctor, and then he's like, yes, I was about to leave without, Dodo, yes. And then, and then they're like, oh yeah, she's decided to stay here in London now, but she sends a love. Yes, so that's what gratitude is these days. Yes, not much, is it? And then technically, I guess Ben and Polly are maybe stowaways, which is interesting because I didn't think that would happen. Honestly, I expected the Doctor to be like, yes, well, as a bit of a thank you for helping me with this adventure today, you can maybe take a trip in the box, yes, that'd be quite good, yes, or in the ship, But what I will say is, what I do like is the fact that he puts the out of operation sign on the TARDIS. I really like that. It's such a little subtle touch, but I do like it. I found it really funny. I'm not gonna lie. I adore the title sequence. Obviously, it's you know, Delia Derbyshire's theme is just iconic at this point. You know, it's just so. This version and rendition of the theme is just so simplistic but so effective, so iconic, legendary. You know, it's part of British culture. You know, there is something quite haunting about it as well. You know, I could imagine if you've seen clips or seen bits of this story or any Hartnell story, or even, you know, sort of Pat Troughton story, you know, the music, I could imagine as a kid being scared by the music, honestly. It's quite, there's something quite, no pun intended, but unearthly about the music, you know, in terms of the theme, and that. But yeah, what else? A lot of it is shot in London and that, which is quite remarkable and interesting, really, in so much as, you know, a lot of it's, as I say, sort of on location. Not all of it, but quite a bit of it, you know. The cliffhangers are okay. There's nothing that, like, wowed me or shocked me a lot. The only real criticism or negative that I can think of this story that really sort of threw me out of the experience, or sort of was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction for me, was the fact that Wotan referred to the Doctor as Doctor Who, and that was a bit like, really? Like, yeah, at first I thought, because spoiler alert, or spoilers if you haven't seen this story before, which if you haven't, don't watch this review, obviously, but if you have, I found it fascinating. One thing that did subvert my expectations going into this, not that I had any real expectations going into the story, but one thing that I will say is that the Wotan and or supercomputer being able to know what TARDIS stands for was fascinating, because for me, my thought was maybe this computer's met the Doctor before, maybe they've done a battle before, you know, before the show even began, maybe, you know, and maybe they'd refer to an adventure that him and Susan maybe went on, or him and Dodo went on, you know, off screen maybe. I do like the reference to the Daleks though, that was pretty cool. But yeah, there was none of that. It was kind of weird because they plant that seed about the TARDIS, but then they also plant the seed of, like, yeah, Doctor Who, because I thought they were going to be like, oh, Doctor, I need the Doctor Who, question mark, and then leave on a cliffhanger, be a bit like, but who is he, you know, and then it'd kind of pick up about, like, the idea of maybe one of the scientisty people being, or computer engineering people being like, oh, who is Doctor Who, or who is this Doctor guy, and then Wotan being like, oh yes, he's this person and that person, and da-da-da-da-da, and we met before, and that, but unfortunately none of that happens. In part 3, that is where all the action happens. Part 1 and 2 are mainly set up for both Wotan, Ben, or Polly, and then Ben, and Wotan. And then kind of the War Machines as well, I guess. They're juggling quite a bit in part 1 and 2, I'd say, for a 1960s story, I think. And then part 3 is the action-packed part with the army. I didn't think the army would show up in this story. I don't know why, but obviously it's not UNIT, but still it's pretty cool to see the army. And then the other thing, what else? The army, then they kind of just wrap up the story in part 4 and that. I do like Hartnell. He's got quite a bit of he's renowned for having that twinkle in his eye. He's got that sort of mystery and that cheekiness about him, you know. He's stern but fair, I think, or he's stern when he needs to be with Ben, but he's also quite playful, you know. He's quite cheeky. I like the bit where he's like, yes, well, official minds only have so much capacity for understanding certain things, that sort of thing. He says to, like, Ben or something, you know. And I like that line, because it's like, I could imagine any other Doctor saying that, you know, even, you know, Capaldi or Whittaker, you know, Jodie Whittaker saying something like that, you know, like a sly dig at a military organisation. That's just so the Doctor, you know, like, even in the Pertwee eras where he's technically working and has to be nice to the Brigadier and UNIT, for his accommodations and for his luxury of having, you know, Bessie and them work on the, or allowing him to work on the TARDIS and having a roof over his head and all that, you know. But he still butts head with authority and with the unit and with the Brigadier and that, or the Brigadier in that sort of era, and that's established here, you know. Kit Pedler was the person who made or thought of the idea, I think, of the War Machines and Wotan, and it's really interesting because I think, honestly, thinking about it, I think this was like the first real sort of thought or big sort of story that sort of really brought the idea of maybe the Cybermen being a thing, you know, because, you know, like, literally not the next story, the Smugglers, but after that, the 10th Planet is the first Cyberman story, and so, yeah, I think this was kind of like a sort of test run for something kind of different, or kind of like the Daleks, but different enough that it was like, maybe we're onto something here, you know, which they were when they did the Cybermen. But I do like the War Machines, and I do think it's a really good one-off sort of story. I'm not clamouring for, you know, the War Machines to come back, only in action figure form, but honestly, if Jodie Whittaker, let's say, never met the War Machines, I wouldn't lose sleep over it, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And that being said, I'd give the War Machines a well-earned 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Please do comment, rate, and subscribe.